Let's address the creaking sound. Much better. I think the sound that you're still hearing is just debris that's on there going underneath the rollers, which we can clean up later. So the issue was that I only fastened every other one of these spacer blocks to save time, and they were vibrating as it rolled around. This bottom skirt needs to be thicker. You can see how flexible it is here, and on the previous videos. It's a little thinner than I had targeted at the time, but regardless, it needs to be thicker. So we're gonna go from 3/4 target to an 1.1/8 target in this case. And I'm gonna use Baltic birch for the bottom layer so that it has a nice surface in the bottom to be in tension. And then I'm gonna build up the rest of it with OSB because I have it laying around and need to use it up. And hopefully it's conservative, and when you build it all out of Baltic birch, it'll be even better than this. You already know how the process goes pretty well, so I'm just gonna throw in a little montage here and we'll jump straight to conclusions. The dimensions came out well. I was able to hit 48 right on the nose for the OD and 45 3/4, maybe just a hair under on the ID. The side-by-side perspective is a little tricky, but obviously we've jumped up hugely in terms of the thickness. Is this ring stiffer? Most definitely, yes. Now when I put this top piece on here, this one's starting to feel not only a little bit flexible, but also very light. It would be heavier if you built it out of hardwood, but probably not by a lot. There just isn't a lot of mass here. My original thought was to try and go back to the 2-piece now that I have this firm base here, but it's just starting to feel complicated. Like this is the complicatedness outlier on the overall simplicity that we've achieved with this new direction. So I think it's time to continue considering the benefits of the single piece design. These are our skirt ramps mounted to the arms. Now it's time to set the skirt on top. Tell me, what problem cannot be made better with more clamps? I'll also point out that these rollers are flat, they're rotating in this plane, but the travel is coming down at the angle. And so right now, those could be mounted at the proper angle later, and that should resolve that. It's interesting that it's almost impossible to avoid jumping into that flat spot. That's some good physical feel for the design that I did not have until a few moments ago. To test the consistency of the lift, I have an indicator here and here, and when I lift this up, if I go until it's just touching, it does it very consistently on both sides. And importantly, it doesn't matter where on the table I do the lifting from. It's almost identical. This is what we want. So I'm going just until it touches or slightly before, and then comparing to the other side. And I really can't tell any difference. They come up at exactly the same time, regardless of where I'm lifting from. The next thing I need to test though is the lockout mechanism. So on this version, or at least when I designed these ramps, I had that flat spot as the top detent. Now it would be deeper and maybe have a hump in order to keep it there, but obviously that's not going to work if this is a one piece, because you're coming up into position and you have to stop crisply and stay there. You cannot over travel to have that flat spot. So the plan here is to have two rods tied together with linkages that extend out and lock it in two different points. And the question is 2 good enough? I'm confident that 1 is not, so I'm going to go to 2. And if 2 isn't good enough, then we would have to reach around more dramatically, because with 2 you can start here and go sideways and have there, and thus only have a direct rod. But if you have to go to the 4 quadrants, then you have to reach around this center somehow, and that gets quite a bit more complicated. I have it locked out here and over there, which means that we're mid-span when we look at this roller. And when I push on this, there's a little bit of flex like you would expect, but it's really not traveling down that ramp at all, which is what we want. That's also projecting out fairly far from the edge, which is giving it some flex as well. For comparison, I'm now at 1 locking pin, just the one on this side. And if I push down, for example, on the opposite side from the locking pin, it's not awful, but there is more flex there than I would like. A spring to help counteract some of this force that makes it just want to spin seems wise as well. I should have space at some point to maybe put a pair of extension springs. I don't want to make it too easy, but taking half or 3/4 of this load off might make that a lot nicer and also less likely for people to slam it into a certain position. The final question is whether or not this is stiff enough to support the large panel, which is going to amplify any variation here. I've tightened up these screws a fair amount, so much that it's sticking slightly at the bottom, but I wanted to get that decreased. I don't want to deal with countersinking these right now, so I'll just put some spacers on top, and then put the panel in approximately the right location based on this star and secure it through the power of gravity. I put this block to help observe the consistency of gap here. And it looks pretty good. The question then is whether or not lifting in the back will cause this thing to pitch forward. And as we come over and start the lift, and then at the end of the lift we have maybe not quite a quarter bubble, and then back down, returns to the same position. I'm going to 0 here, and then drop down to not quite a quarter bubble, which will give me a reading of 177 thousandths, so not quite an 1/8 and a half. A little more than I was hoping. I'll have to think on this one. Tightening up this structure here will no doubt improve things, but how much is it going to improve? Maybe 30%? If we brought that variation in the front down to an 1/8, I could probably live with that. We also have the star here, which could have something underneath to help guide it, as well as the normal tongue and groove style alignments. We have some different options, so this doesn't feel like a showstopper. I just need to be careful. Having a third shaft or putting the second one in the front doesn't work, because that would need to either be centered, which would require it to then pass through this piece of track, or it would have to be offset, which also doesn't work because we need the wedge shape space to be free for the star to sit in. All of this is quite close together. That star is sitting right here when it's in the closed condition. We've built confidence in our improvements for lifting with the torque tubes, as well as this different skirt strategy and the hub in the center. So now I need to spend some time in CAD working out all the details, getting just the right geometry to have some laser cut parts for the torque tube levers. And hopefully after this I can kick off the final prototype build where things will work much more smoothly, and at the end of that we'll just be ironing out little tiny bugs. That's the goal. Let's see how it turns out. Thank you for watching.